we're with longtime Baltimore media figure, social activist, civil rights activist, Mark Steiner. Mark, before we get you to fill us in on what's happening with emerging media, because you're doing all kinds of neat stuff, I can't have you on, longtime city resident, longtime city activist, without talking a little bit about the mayor's race. We're not going to ask you to endorse anyone unless within the last 24 hours or so you have and we missed it, or you want to make news, we'll let you make news. But before we get into the candidates, talk about what Baltimore needs in a mayor here in 2020. Talk about the big picture. Talk about mayor in terms of qualities and attributes as opposed to the particular candidates. What do you want to see in a mayor?
Oh, well, first of all, I think we need, whoever is the next mayor, there has to be someone taking us forward and not be taking us backwards on many levels. And it's someone who understands, someone who really understands the city from the bottom up, who can understand that the only way for us to, in the long run, defeat the crime-ridden nature of our streets, especially inner city streets, is economic development, is saying things like, is understanding that if you give a TIF, if you bring in a business, if you are going to do construction business in the city, whatever it is, that you have to hire people in this city. The only way out of the morass of dystopian poverty that fuels the violence in our community is stability and bringing people into a life where they can actually have a family and build community like we used to have in this city. Even in our toughest communities when we were kids, and I was in many of those toughest communities when I was a kid. That the difference was that I told one of my producers who's now working for Brandon Scott as we were driving through the city one day, I said, all these houses here that are abandoned and empty shells, when I was a kid, this was a tough-ass neighborhood. You had to fight on the corner. Things happened. People hustled. They were tough communities.
You had one or two scuffles along the way, Mark.
I had a few. But the difference was that every one of these empty houses was filled with families, with fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts and grandmothers taking care of each other, working, whether you were running an Arab's cart or working at Buffalo Steel or were a doctor, whatever it was. People were working and living together. So we have to rebuild our city, not go backwards, but build it for the future. Someone has a vision to how to do that. That's really important. Because, we can be tough on the knuckleheads who are causing the worst violence. That's fine. We have to stop that. You can't live like that. But it's the larger picture we have to get a hold of. We have to understand what restorative justice is about, to bring people back whole as human beings to rebuild a community. People understand that, and how to do that is really important, and how to get that done. How you make agreements with people like Johnny O and others who have also a vision for the future, who are trying to do things in a different way, to really build a different metropolitan area, understanding we're part of a whole.
And we talked to Stuart Pittman about that last week, Anne Arundel County, just saying, look, at some point, Baltimore, the counties can't just hold their nose and say that's their problem, nor can Annapolis. And I live at the Inner Harbor, and one of the reasons you're here and we finally got to meet is, I own property at the Inner Harbor. My wife and I own a beautiful place. We tried to sell it 2 years ago. We can't get anybody to walk through it, literally.
Right.
Property that we should be able to sell at some relative value to where we are. And this is long before COVID. This is the era of Trump and post-Freddie Gray. And now, when we founded Baltimore Positive, I knew Catherine Pugh was incompetent. The day we started, it was literally Dutch Rupersberger and us over Pizza John's looking up. She was, the feds were coming into her house that day. I didn't know how corrupt it was. The corruption is at the heart of all of this, right? For everything around Sheila, everything around the city, everything around where all the money goes, that, and Catherine Pugh, I think for all of us who vote in the city, and I know you've escaped out to the county on us, Mark, but, share a common thought that You don't even live in the city, but you need the city fixed. Everybody should want the city fixed. And it breaks my heart when I hear people, and these are Trumpers, at Hartford County, Anne Arundel County, saying, I'm never going back to the city. Never. Squeegee, never going to an Oriole game. And I'm thinking to myself, that we've got to change. That's up to the people in the city need to make it more hospitable. All these things you're talking about, all they see is the murder number, the crime, and what's on Fox 45,
Yep, I agree. And just to add here real quick, I'm an accidental county resident.
Well, I got a couch here, Mark, if you want to come back,
Mark, even as county executive in my years in county government, that there was never any doubt that Mark's a city boy at heart and an accidental county resident is the way to put it. Mark, looking at this election, this is a fascinating election. If the polls are to be believed, pretty much everyone can win it, with the exception of the incumbent mayor. It appears that Mayor Young is not going to be reelected. But it looks like any one of the other 5 candidates can win. What's your, as we broadcast this, we're a matter of days away, literally, from an election. What's your take as we come up to June 2nd as to the state of the race?
Well, we saw the latest poll, and it's what a lot of us have thought was the case anyway. This is a really interesting dynamic at the moment. You've got Mayor Miller, Brandon Scott, and Sheila Dixon, and I think they clearly are. One of those 3 will be the next mayor. Let me start this way. First, I think it's a travesty that the next mayor is going to be elected with maybe 16% of the primary votes.
Isn't that amazing? Well, you've been very vocal, Mark. Mark, talk about that, because you've been vocal about the need for a change in the law that require runoff. Talk to folks about that.
Well, I'd like to see us pass a charter amendment and also take it to the state legislature to change the law, so that if nobody wins 50.1% of the vote in the primary or the general election in Baltimore City, then you have to go to a runoff, whether 2 or 3 weeks later, whatever that number might be. So you actually have a democratic process. We have the most undemocratic process. It's absurd that somebody who wins a plurality, maybe a small plurality of the primary vote is going to be the next mayor. That's unjust.
Well, Mark, how does someone? I was on a Zoom conference yesterday, and that was one of the topics. And these were people very much invested in the future of Baltimore City. And their concern is what you just said, and I'm going to put it to you in the form of a question. Can someone who is elected, I'll bump your 16% a little higher. Let's say they get 21 or 22%. Can someone who gets elected in a city where 80% of the people voted for someone else, can that person govern successfully coming out of that election?
That person still has to win in November. I'm just going to throw that in. Go ahead.
Yeah, they do, but the Republicans are not going to win in Baltimore.
Right.
And to run an independent campaign is very tough. Sheila Dixon tried it, and it's very tough to do that, to run a write-in campaign. It's almost impossible to win that way. But yeah, sure, they can govern. They can govern. But I think it would have its difficulties, because once you're mayor, you have all this power, and if you're actually going to do things and change things, you can build a popularity and support, despite the fact that you only had 16 to 20% of the vote in the primary and won and became the mayor.
Give us an objective analysis, Mark, of the keeping it real simple. Let's focus on the 3 that you said you think can win. You believe the next mayor is going to be Mary Miller, Sheila Dixon, or Brandon Scott. Folks,
right.
That's the Steiner files for today. So, taking those 3, give us a quick thumbnail of what you see as strengths of each one and the weaknesses of each one.
Well, I think Mary Miller is extremely bright, and I think she does believe in the city and has the best interest of the city at heart. I really don't believe that Mary Miller really understands the depth of the issues that face the city or how to address them. I think she's been a little disconnected from that. And I think that if for argument's sake, somebody else wins the primary, the first thing that I would do if I was a vice mayor candidate, and it wasn't Mary Miller, was to bring her into the administration quickly.
Nestor has said that repeatedly, by the way. Nestor has said that should he be elected mayor, one of his first calls would be to Mary Miller.
Oh, and quite frankly, the second would be to Theroux and say, bring that crime plan in here. Let's talk about that. Because,
well, we can argue about that. I'm not so sure I agree with Theroux's crime plan at all.
I don't agree, but I would say he has a real one where, other than Harrison's crime plan, which is where we are, and that's the standard, right, to say what we're doing with Harrison is what we're doing, right? And Mary agrees with that, and I agree with that to some degree. But I do think whatever we're doing right now, the people aren't happy with that. Certainly the counties aren't happy with that. And the perception of business in the economy, the perception that people would buy my home are not happy with that, right?
No, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, but Theroux has, I mean,
before we jump to Theroux and
I'll finish
jump back. So you gave us Mary. Give us the thumbnail on Brandon. Strength, sweetness.
So Brandon, I think, and I mean, he gets his bum rap about not being experienced enough. And I think there's a lot of kind of racial overtones to that, even though there's a lot of older black churchwomen who probably think the same. He's not that much younger than O'Malley was when O'Malley became mayor. And his team will make that point over and over, Mark. They'll say, how about Martin O'Malley? How about Johnny O? They'll point to Johnny O. That's Johnny O. He's doing a great job. He's been on the council for 9 years. He chaired one of the most significant committees. He's been president for a year. I mean, he does have some chops. I think probably his biggest drawback is that people think he's too young. People don't take him seriously. I think that's really true. That's one of his biggest drawbacks. His interesting poll showed that he has a vast majority of people under 50 are supporting him, white and black, which I think is an interesting phenomenon. Sheila was on her way to being a great mayor. And I've known Sheila since she was 23 years old. We both worked at Baltimore Prep together on the southwest side of the city, working with kids. And, but, you know, as much as I like her personally, and I think she was great when she was mayor, I think Baltimore has to move on. And most people in the city feel that way. She is like, it's interesting when you watch this race. It's disturbing too, that I find that there's a body of voters, mostly black in the city, who are going to be with Sheila no matter what happens. And they're solidly going to be behind her for lots of reasons about the black community feeling left out of the economic development of this city and left out of the process despite black elected officials, and that white folks went after Sheila. There's a mindset and thinking. So they're going to be behind Sheila. On the other side, you got Mary Miller. I mean, I am just flabbergasted by every time I talk to somebody white in Baltimore, a friend or a colleague or just somebody I'm in a conversation with, they're voting for Mary Miller. And so I go, why? Because they say she is the one who can manage and make this and turn the city around. She has what it takes. And I said, well, then let's look at some of the other candidates. Why would she have it any more than, let's say, Brandon? So to me, it's amazing to watch this racial divide in the city, which I find extremely disturbing, but also very real.
Well, and so real that the black butterflies talked about. Like it's talked about on every one of these Zooms and every single conversation. So I don't think we're not talking about tough issues where maybe 12 years ago, 16 years ago, there would be some undertone of all of that. But I think, the cards are on the table when Mary Miller just speaks out and speaks about it pretty directly about the racial divide and redlining and things that candidates around here never talked about, right?
We can thank Lawrence Brown. Lawrence Brown, who the professor who was at Morgan and is now at Wisconsin, brilliant scholar, is the one who brought us the white L and the black butterfly. He's the one who made us start talking about that. He really took his scholarship and turned it into a community conversation that made people realize what we were facing. So every time they come, we got to remember Lawrence. He's a great guy and he's brilliant.
Well, Mark, let's even build out on that. Are you? Do you have enough time to go a few more minutes, Mark? What's your schedule?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Okay, great. Because and Nestor, we may end up breaking this one up into two episodes because there's so much to talk about here. Talking about the black butterfly, the white elf, we even took it to a broader discussion recently with Ryan Cassie, who wrote a terrifically thought-provoking article in Baltimore Magazine called "How to Fix Baltimore." And he talked, Mark. He brought out again an issue that's been discussed all the way back to 1948. This issue of we need to really think about merging Baltimore City and Baltimore County again, and perhaps even parts of Anne Arundel, and that these artificial lines really have been detrimental. And he gives the history of it. We know it's politically almost impossible to do. What are your thoughts about that big idea, Mark?
Ooh, that's huge. It's got so many facets to it. Good Lord. I mean, it would be really hard to pull off. I think you get a lot of people in all three jurisdictions going, "What?" I'm not, and not really supporting that kind of idea for lots of different reasons. I mean, I personally am not opposed to it. I mean, I think Baltimore County, in some ways has to also get its act together around its representation. When you have a county that's 40% communities of color now, and we got one black council person. So there's some issues that the county has to address too. But I think that that would be so hard to pull off, Don. I mean, I can't see how that could politically pull that off. I meant to talk to Ron about that because I read his piece, and I think Ron's a really great thinker, a great journalist. He's a really, really thought-provoking guy. I like him a lot.
He had some examples in other large states and cities where it had happened. Don Hutchinson, we had Don on, Mark, and Don talked about the fact that he thought it was a really important idea. But again, as he said, none of us who ever sat in that chair out there ever saw it as doable. I mean, and that includes folks like Ted Venetoulis and Don Hutchinson, who had a very
well, there goes your politics, Don.
focus.
Everybody realizes it's a good idea, yet nobody wants to do it. And Mark, I always say this, when I'm in New York and I'm in the subway underneath anywhere in that city, I think to myself, whose idea was this? And what political capital did they have to use to say we're going to build something that 30 years from now people will actually use? And that was palatable. And then it got done,
But so you raised a really important piece here. So how could this happen? If you think about how it could happen, I think that you have to, I used to call myself a revolutionary. I'm going to be a pragmatic revolutionary instead. So let's think about how you might change that. And maybe you change it by doing something that you alluded to, which is that maybe if the three jurisdictions actually work together on transportation and creating a system that unites the communities, maybe you work together to, this will be an anathema to some people, but you think about how you might be able to make the school system slowly relate to one another and allow students going back and forth depending on where and what they wanted to study. Supposing you looked at it in terms of economic development and how you take something like the harbor and build a commercial system and the commercial harbor and unite Baltimore City County and Anne Arundel County around those issues.
Well, it's pretty fundamental, right, Mark? A strong Baltimore is a strong Towson, is a strong White Marsh, is a strong Reisterstown, is a strong, right?
Right.
I mean, that's fundamental until somebody has to vote on it.
So as I'm saying, so maybe you don't. Maybe it's something that you don't have a vote on. Maybe it's something that leaders who are inspired start working on and building. I mean, that to me, maybe that's the way to approach it. To really begin to integrate our metropolitan area, and then that it becomes almost, it morphs into something that you can then have the political conversation in my daughter's generation, maybe, or I have daughters who are 50 and I have a daughter who's 23. So I mean, in either daughter's generation can kind of come up and really make those changes. But maybe that's how it has to happen. But I think you could have a discussion, a serious discussion about starting with transportation and economic development around the harbor, and then maybe even education, to talk about how we would begin to do that. Maybe, giving kids the right in Baltimore City to look. Baltimore School for the Arts, where I taught for 11 years, is a place we accepted county students.
And people, Mark, the important thing is that these are big ideas that you and Nestor are talking about, and we need folks out in the public arena talking about big ideas. And talking about big ideas, catch people up, Mark, on where they can find Mark Steiner. Tell us a little bit about the Center for Emerging Media, what you're working on, and what you're proud of that you've been accomplishing with it.
Oh my! Well, so it's been a sojourn. The center's been around for like 20-some years now, through WYPR and WEAA and all the other work we've done. And so doing a lot of work right now is consulting over a place called The Real News that kind of was falling apart and coming it back together. I've been helping them out with some stuff. I've been working there for a bit, and we have some projects going, but they're not ready for public announcement just yet at the center. There's a couple of major projects I'm working on that I'm hoping to get. I'm working on getting funded. One is a stage radio play that I'm working on about a piece of Maryland history that is actually national history we've forgotten about, that I'm working on. And I'm working on another project of an interview series. So but I don't want to jump the gun until I have them out there.
Well, what's the piece, Mark, when you look back at the work you've done? And you went to Vietnam, and you've done some amazing stuff. What's the one piece, if somebody put you on the spot? I know it's like picking between children, but if somebody said to you, Mark, pick one series or one piece that you worked on, that you produced, that was a finished product, that when you look back at the end of your day, say, man, that was a good one. What would it be?
Oh, man, that is so hard to do. It's so hard to do. It really is. The piece we did on the Just Words, which was a series I did on the voices of the working poor in the Baltimore metropolitan area, the one that won us a Peabody. That was a piece of work I did that meant a lot. Shared Weight was our Vietnam series, which I thought was unique and different. Bringing together the people who fought on all sides of that conflict in Vietnam at one time to tell stories about what happened at that period. That was something I'm proud of. The Alabama Chronicles, my work with the MLK's barber, and that story that we told. The Baltimore Uprising stuff we did with Freddie Gray. It's hard. There was a lot. I can't even
tell people about the MLK barber story, Mark. I can hear people in their car going, wait a minute, MLK's barber. And they say, come on, Steiner, come back to that. Tell us a little bit about MLK's barber.
Well, God, this was so these two colleagues in Baltimore brought this guy Nelson Malden to my studio at WEAA. And so I interviewed him on my radio show, and he was Martin Luther King's barber in the early 1950s, at the beginning of the bus boycott. And he told these incredible stories about King, and he is a fascinating man. And so we got to be really friendly and started writing back and forth and talking on the phone. So we went down and told his story. And we did a very short mini doc on his work, and I was hoping it was going to be a much bigger film. It didn't turn out to be a bigger film, but it was a great film that we produced on him, and it was just an amazing story. Pieces of stories about King and people on that we learned in the Montgomery bus boycott, and how it changed America, and people you never heard of before. And we were able to tell that story. And Nelson's just a gem. He's in his 80s. He is just a great raconteur. And he's the kind of guy that Nelson Malden is.
Well, it has been a pleasurable first visit with you, Mark Steiner. I hope it is not our last. We need you on the wall, my man. So come on down to the city here. And
Nestor, I thought you might enjoy this one.
Well,
I appreciate the invite. I really appreciate the invite. I had a great time.
Well, we'll tell some more stories in the aftermath of the election here coming up in a couple weeks. We're going to send everybody out to see you for all that you're doing of real news and all the stuff you've ever done. We appreciate you, and this will not be the last visit at Baltimore Positive. You're too positive to not be on Baltimore Positive, Mark Steiner.
Thank you.
You got it. Mark Steiner, the man, the myth, the legend. Our first time ever. We still have never met physically in the same room. We just did an hour and 12 minutes of radio together. I'll tell you what, shout out to State Fair. I'm going to need some chicken and waffles and some shrimp and grits soon. Big thanks to our friends at Fadley's for sponsoring us. Damie's there. They're shipping crab cakes all over the world. They shipped one into my belly curbside the other day. I got some mac and cheese here. Fadley's, State Fair, our friends at Moeller and Gary Realty, still selling houses with masks on, still doing it on the internet, buying and showing. They can list your home. They can sell your home. Our friend Jeff Moeller, Don's son Jeff Moeller, Moeller and Gary Realty. And last but never least, Taharka Ice Cream. I'm going to hold the pistachio up because my wife finished this off. She's got the thing for the pistachio. I'm going to be hard-pressed to get that. She's probably not going to get any honey graham from me either. But luckily, Taharka is our new sponsor for Baltimore Positive. So big shout-out. Nothing more made in Baltimore, perhaps, than them and us. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, keeping calm, staying local, and always Baltimore Positive.